I came to Amsterdam, when was it? 1997 even, so.
Wow.
In May 1940, Amsterdam was taken over by the Germans. Immediately, they set the clock forward, so it was the same time in Amsterdam as in Berlin. The weather report disappeared from the newspapers. It was now a military secret. All streetlights were turned off. Dutch organizations were Nazified or forbidden. Soon, the Nazis started to ban Jews from parks, pools, shops, cafes and schools, from all public life. Music by Jewish composers could no longer be played. In 1941, they started rounding people up. In 1942, the deportations began.
Thank you both for speaking to me today. To begin with, I wanted to ask Bianca, you are a historian and a writer and a filmmaker yourself, and can you tell us about how the idea for this first came to you when you were writing the book, Atlas of an Occupied City?
Well, the writing of the book goes back all the way to 2005 when I published a small version, because it's strange to live in a city where you know all these things happened, but you can't really see it, because Amsterdam, 17th century, golden century they used to call it, beautiful canal houses and so on, but you can't really see what went on there. So that was what I wanted to bring to the fore in the book, which was so written as a kind of guidebook that you really go neighborhood by neighborhood and street by street, house by house, sometimes even floor by floor, what happened there during the Second World War. I think already then, when I was writing that book, Steve had the idea to turn it into a film.
And what was the process by which you kind of reached that point, deciding this is the project we're going to make, we're going to adapt this into a feature, into a documentary?
Well, it was very organic in a way, because in tandem, as Bianca, because I came to Amsterdam, when was it? 1997 even, so.
Wow.
1997.
Long,
No, 96, 96, 96, 96, 96, 96, 96. Anyway, moving on. I think it's 95. This is what happens. COVID and everything else.
Yeah, right.
Enough. So basically, it was one of those interesting times where, when I first arrived in Amsterdam, obviously coming from London and being in a formerly occupied city rather, it was very strange, because you saw these sort of how can I say, monuments, small monuments where people were gathered and killed and shot for resisting and stuff. And it was just really weird that these things were going on. And walking around the city, it kind of, I just sort of thought I was living with ghosts. There were two narratives going on at the same time: the present day and the past. And again, it's when you're unfamiliar with something and you sort of feel the weight of history as you walk down the street with every step. Somehow I felt that I could make a film out of this somehow, but I didn't know what it was, and I was struggling with it. And then I was sitting, Bianca was typing it, tapping on her keys next door in her office, and I thought, oh, what happened to the past? The past, we see the past in the present, meaning that we don't see the past, but we see the present in the past. And that was, of course, Bianca's text was It was yeah, hand in glove.
Mm.
And much bigger version of the book was published in 2018, I think.
Yes,
And then the plan to turn that one into a film came pretty close.
pretty close. Yeah,
And of course, the book is contains more than 2,000 addresses, and the film 130.
130. That's great. Yeah,
So it's not the whole.
yeah.
They're not compatible, but
No.
they're the same family.
No, I think what
Twins.
absolutely that it's the same family. I mean, related to in a very direct way. And what we did was actually we shot every single address in the book. So we shot over 2,000 addresses. So
Wow.
we have this, and that will be that's going to be shown at another time, which is everything. 72 hours of
38.
sorry. There you go. 30 numbers.
That's
38 hours of footage. So we're doing it, and it's that. I mean, that's another thing completely. The film is a film, what you see, but this other thing, it will be seen as an artwork. But I'm working on that and how to display it in obviously a completely different way to how cinema is sort of viewed.
right. And so what I'm getting is that the visual approach to it, the combination of this, the narration and the imagery, it kind of came organically to you. It felt like maybe it felt like the right approach from the off.
Yes, it's just beautiful. I thought there's a certain kind of sense where you're looking at something in the present and engage with the voiceover with something from the past. So you are projecting onto this contemporary image of now, the past. And again, at the same time, what you're dealing with is you're looking at how people live now and how that past has affected the present in a real way. The violence, the sort of kind of the conflict, the absurdity, and then you're looking at someone sort of I don't know, buying a loaf of bread in a supermarket. I mean, and what was earned, what was fought for those people to do the most simplest things, and even to demonstrate. Again, it's one of those to do whatever has been sort of has been fought for, has been sacrificed for, and that's when we see the present.
You feel it every minute, and I think honestly the effect of that narration is so haunting, and it seems to me because it's not without emotion, but it feels like it's not leading you in a certain way. It's not, there's no intention for emotional manipulation there.
No.
Was that your intention?
That was very,
Very
very important to us. That's also the way I wrote it. I thought, people don't need to be guided in a certain direction. The facts really speak for themselves, and I think that in the way Melanie narrates it, that same thing happens. You hear what she says, and she's not completely. It's not like cold and unemotional, but she lets the words speak for themselves.
She's invested in. I mean, because even the fact that this is obviously a young woman's voice, she's engaged with it because of it's her immediate, it's her presence, it's her immediate sort of what can I say? She has something to well, she's invested in the future,
and that also was important. That this is not an old voice. This is not someone telling, hey, you don't know this and we do, so kind of learning. But she is just one step ahead of the viewer. She just is finding all this stuff out herself. So you're more together on a voyage of discovery than that it is a history lesson.
Yeah, there's no wagging the finger. It's actually step with you in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet it doesn't feel like there's any clinical coldness or anything. I mean, I was really struck by how often the word murdered was used. They were murdered in these camps. It was not, there was no kind of distance there. It was
no ambiguity.
No ambiguity. Mm. Um, so you've spoken about how much footage was collated for the film. Even with the extended runtime, I mean, yes, you probably would have to leave a huge amount of stories and footage on the cutting room floor. In the making of this film, how did you go about deciding what to omit?
Well, again, I felt that if this movie was, I wanted it to be like almost like an English garden, where you, other than like a French garden where it's very formal, this in the English garden, there's a roaming, there's a sort of, there's a meandering, you sort of go back on yourself, just like if you were parachuted into Amsterdam, you get lost and then you'll get found. So I wanted this sort of roaming thing to happen, this thing of going back on yourself. So it wasn't sort of linear in a way. It was much more random than that. And I just thought that would make a beautiful pattern in the way of a texture, in a way of being much more stimulating. And again, it's that, and exactly what I did when I first came to Amsterdam. You sort of walk around and your canal looks the same and what have you, and get lost and then you get found. But also, it's one of those situations where, of course, there were a lot of the same similar stories in the footage that I had as well, obviously, because unfortunately, there's a lot of things which were horrendous and actually beautiful, but again, it was like repeated. So it's about taking the ones that you felt that would be more helpful on that journey. And again, it was one of those things where it was actually fun in a way. It's fun to not the right words to use, but it was actually sort of how can I say it was actually the structure happened through the doing. Work is when you're working, when you're in the work, it actually tells you in some ways what it wants, and therefore you amend to it, but also you keep it on the path. So the editing process was pretty how can I say it was a responsibility because of course you're dealing with things which are very very sensitive, very very important, and you're dealing with people's lives, but at the same time there was a certain kind of that weight of what was I going to say? The weight of wanting to sort of do the right thing was very much in the forefront of my mind.
And I think also by doing it this way, it tells you history is all around you. It's not just the biggest stories that we're going to tell here, but it's also the really small stories that are going to be told. So on every street corner, in every house. So you will imagine much more like, God, this film could have gone on even much, much longer because there's so many stories happening all around us. And I think when you will get the feeling you could have made a film with this kind of process in London or Paris or Moscow.
And I think most of it, first and foremost, is that we wanted this responsibility.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. We wanted that responsibility because we're here now. We can do something about that now. And because unfortunately it's getting to the end of the road where now survivors of that time, people who actually physically witnessed it are unfortunately leaving. So we are the sort of remainders of their oral and their sort of sort of storytelling as such. So we have a responsibility.
So an act of preservation as well, in a certain sense, of this time as well as the past. I mean, there are so many fascinating sort of juxtapositions within the film, and I was really interested as to like how much was in mind about how you would put everything together before you saw what you found, in your observing of what's happening on the street when you're filming.
Well.
Sorry, carry on.
I don't know. So with the editing, when I started, I thought the way to start is I wanted to start with the hardest possible thing. I thought let's start. How do you start with all that footage? Where do you begin? Knowing that how the structure. I think in fact I had an idea of the structure, but I didn't know if that was the structure that was going to be used because I don't like to put a stencil on things. I think again I don't want to restrict how things need to be had to sort of evolve. But I thought okay. Let me just start with this and see how we can pan out from there. So I started with, the the families who basically took their lives and their children's lives, and who thought that the only way that they could actually deal with the situation is not to exist. So I wanted to deal with that, the whole idea of people feeling that there was no space for them, there was no place for them in this world because of the world they were living in. So that's started with that kind of that material of people who took their lives and their children's lives. And then from then things spiraled out. It was the beginning. I think what happened with that, it kind of something switched on in my head, because when you go to the darkest, deepest hole, then you have to try to find your way out. Emotionally, structurally, that was the starting point.
And how, I mean, you are dealing for a long time. You both have worked with this subject for a very long time now. How do you maintain your, take care of yourself when dealing with stories of such magnitude, horror, trauma? What were the processes you were having in terms of taking care of your own kind of spirit, soul while you were making this film?
Honestly, I think family. I just think I think the fact that the older now, our children and our families and work, and just being healthy to have these kind of conversations with each other.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard when you hear certain stories and you're really like very affected by it. But for me as a historian, or Steve as a filmmaker, what is then your goal is to preserve it and to bring it to the light as well as you can. So what for me, for instance, was far more haunting, if I couldn't find any information about someone, I just found that they were born and they were murdered and they lived here. So that even was of course for this project, that was not enough. So that for me was a very haunting, to that realization that from some people you cannot even in such a way commemorate or honor, only in a kind of collective way, but not to give some kind of trace of their individuality. That was for me hard.
And is there a moment that really sticks out to you? Is there a story or a piece of footage that you collected that feels like not a favorite, but one that feels like the moment you're most proud of in the film? Or is it more of everything kind of coming together?
I think it's more of everything coming together. I couldn't pick one story, because it's the narrative of the city.
Yeah.
Again, it's the sort of bloodstream of the city in a way. As you walk through the streets, as you pass the streets, it's so many. Again, I can't. Well, I mean, we're here now in Amsterdam, and every time I walk down the road to the shops or whatever, you're bringing this history with you. But again, it's not heavy.
No.
It's just the fact that I'm aware of it. We're aware of it.
I think also what I've watched the film quite a few times now in its entirety.
Yeah.
But what happens is that it really becomes an experience, or even a kind of meditation sometimes. You cannot
Absolutely
absorb all this information in what you hear and what you see in the same way. So the one time something else stands out than another time, depending on where you are in your thoughts yourself that day. So in that way, it's a very rich project that you could really view a couple of times, and it will bring you something else each time, because also it's kind of fluid. There's a lot of room for the viewer to think like, hey, we hear this and we see this, but how is there a connection? Is there another connection? Can I make my own connection? That sort of things. It's a very active, meditative, but active at the same time.
Okay, yeah, I think you said this before. It's more meditative than a history lesson. I mean, you're there, you're present, you're taking what you can. Certain things will pass you by, and you're again. It's one of those things where you're absorbed in a narrative, but at the same time, you can't hold on to everything. So you certain bits. Sometimes you'll look at the images, sometimes you'll hear the voiceover, but it's about that immersiveness. It's about that, because it's so overwhelming. You couldn't possibly rip everything. In fact, you couldn't. And that's the point, you know.
I felt that myself. I mean, it's definitely yeah, meditative is the exact word I would use. I mean, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I did want to ask about the soundscape as well, because I do feel like it's such an integral part to this experience and creating that feeling. I mean, the use of music, whether it be music that you've had composed for the film, or I mean, there's a Bob Marley track in there, there's pop music, there's the Cause. I mean, all this kind of flowing into each other is really beautiful. And I wonder how you conceived of how you would use music and sound in this film.
Well, first and foremost, I tell you a funny story. So I was in some kind of shop, and this music came on as I was walking through, and I said, "Who's this?" And you know, it's a situation when you hear this music and you have no idea who the composer is, if it's live or dead. But it just sort of, I couldn't shake it. So thank goodness I had someone who had a friend of mine who has Shazam on their phone. Get Shazam, people. And it came up as this guy who was alive, a guy called Ollie Madden.
Oliver.
Oliver. Is it Madden?
I don't know.
Oh my God. I don't think, I forgot Ollie's name. It's not Ollie. Anyway, amazing composer. And I didn't know, I mean, and who he was or whatever. And I rang him up and I talked to him about the project, and he said yes. And that was it. It was basically what he did in some ways was, how can I say, he has sort of encapsulated the tone in a way. I mean, score, which is in the picture. And I feel that it's almost like you can sprinkle sort of flour onto things, and then you sort of see that, which are invisible, and then you see the form. Oliver Coates. Sorry, boom. Oliver Coates. Numbers, names. It's not language, people.
I'm the same. Don't worry.
Too many things going on. I apologize. Oliver Coates and Ollie, and I didn't know he's an amazing musician, an extraordinary cellist. With the piece at the end of the picture, it's just so haunting.
Unbelievable. So beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm so grateful to him, and it just also encapsulated the music of what's going on in the city. And the sound, again, is obviously very, very important. So the design was just, you know, we had to get it right. But just not being too, just sort of allowing the viewer to feel, you know, not pushed back, but pulled in. That's the key.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for making the time to speak to me today. I was saying to Bianca before, I am really deeply moved by this film. And thank you both for speaking to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope we get to New Zealand one day.
Yes.
Please. We would be so stoked to have you make something here.
Take care.
Okay,
Thank you
bye-bye.
very much.
See you.
Bye-bye.